For Korea, the great game is on. Donald Trump confirms he will meet Kim in Singapore. A letter delivered by a senior Kim aide to the White House did the trick, despite the president not even reading it.
The ending of the Korean War. Can you believe that we're talking about the ending of the Korean War? You're talking about 70 years.
After weeks of manoeuvring, Donald Trump, who Kim once called a dotard, will meet the man he once dismissed as Little Rocket Man in 12 days' time. Trump's agenda: a great future for North Korea and an end to the Korean War if the nuclear weapons go. Barely a spark of anger from a disappointed Theresa May on Trump's unjustified trade war. Extraordinary violence on the streets of London. A bike, a car and a zombie knife. And the Scafell Pike War Memorial, the oldest in England, being restored to its rightful glory. Good evening. From insults and threats to the threshold of breakthrough peace talks, it has been a remarkable journey. A simple letter from Kim Jong-un to Donald Trump signalled the countdown to something potentially remarkable. The leader of North Korea will meet the President of the United States in Singapore on June the 12th. Trump didn't even read the letter, but talked of a great future for North Korea and an end to the decades-long war between North and South Korea. It all hinges on Kim dumping his nuclear weapons, for which he in turn will expect the denuclearization of the South.
There was no arrival ceremony, not even a handshake to welcome him. But the symbolism was simply immense. A powerful North Korean official striding towards the Oval Office to meet the leader who had threatened Pyongyang with fire and fury. Kim Jong-chul spent nearly 2 hours with the president, handing over a letter from the supreme leader. The former North Korean spy master appeared to get on well with Trump. And when they emerged onto the South Lawn, they were still engaged in a long conversation. A remarkable moment for a heavily sanctioned official who comes from a pariah state. Trump then told reporters that the summit with Kim Jong-un is now officially back on.
June 12th, we'll be in Singapore. It'll be a beginning, I don't say, and I've never said it happens in one meeting. You're talking about years of hostility, years of problems, years of really hatred between so many different nations.
The president and his Secretary of State posed for photographs with the North Korean delegation. And still the talking went on, with the suggestion that also on the agenda might be a formal end to the Korean War. Only a ceasefire has kept the peace since 1953.
We talked about it. We talked about ending the war. And, you know, this war has been going on, it's got to be the longest war, almost 70 years, right?
5월 31일
The most significant question, of course, remains unanswered. Is Kim Jong-un, who was yesterday meeting with the Russian foreign minister, really prepared to dismantle his entire nuclear arsenal? The answer may lie in the letter that Kim Jong-chul delivered on behalf of his leader. Though to add to the intrigue, Trump first described the message as a revelation.
It was a very interesting letter, and at some point it may be appropriate, and maybe I'll be able to give it to you, maybe you'll be able to see it.
But minutes later acknowledged he hadn't actually read it.
I haven't seen the letter yet. I purposely didn't open the letter. I may be in for a big surprise, folks.
Some veteran diplomats remain concerned that the Americans are being outmaneuvered by the North Korean regime. And that fear was amplified today when President Trump admitted that one highly sensitive subject wasn't even mentioned.
I think we probably will, and maybe in great detail. We did not talk about human rights.
Notably, the president escorted Kim Jong-chul to his car. Meeting a US president is seen as a diplomatic prize. And today the North Koreans won the jackpot. And it sets the scene for a summit in Singapore that will be the most highly anticipated encounter for a generation.
So, Robert, how high are the expectations for what comes out of this summit?
Oh, I think the White House was very aware that expectations were in danger of spinning
out of control. So today was in part an exercise in expectation management. At several points, as he was talking to reporters there on the South Lawn, he made the point that one summit wouldn't by itself solve the complex North Korean nuclear issue, that it was actually a process that might need several meetings and summits, and that it might go quickly or it might go slowly. I think some analysts will be reassured by that. There was a lot of fear that the diplomacy lacked any kind of structure or discipline, and thereby risked the chances of kind of catastrophic failure. Alistair, I think the kind of takeaway, if you like, tonight is we've often spoken about this being a whiplash presidency, and we saw it again today at the White House. This summit was on, then off, now back on again. The agenda is still something of a mystery. I think if we know anything about this president, he will treat Singapore as something of a TV reality show, maximising the drama.
Robert, thank you. Well, while President Trump was busy building bridges with North Korea, America's long-term foe, its allies were busy getting in their retaliation to his decision to impose tariffs on imports of aluminium and steel. The EU, Canada and Mexico all hit back, threatening to impose their own tariffs on the United States. But here the words were more carefully chosen. The Prime Minister talking of her disappointment at the unjustified actions, a sign perhaps that Downing Street is keen not to turn this row into a transatlantic trade war.
The opening salvos of a trade war have now been fired. The UK steel industry targeted by Trump's tariffs, and today the Prime Minister fired back. In a statement, Theresa May said, "I am deeply disappointed at the unjustified decision by the US. The EU and UK should be permanently exempted from tariffs, and we will continue to work together to protect and safeguard our workers and industries." And the Trade Secretary, Liam Fox, warning against any escalation of the dispute.
It is very, very unfortunate if we get into this tit-for-tat position, especially with one of our closest allies. Nobody wins in a trade war. There are only casualties.
31,000 jobs depend on the UK steel industry. Each year, Britain exports 350,000 tonnes of steel to America, worth more than £350 million. That's 7% of the UK's total steel production. At this steel business in Yorkshire, they're preparing the next shipment for a customer in the US. The boss, already fearing the fallout, will hit profits.
The American consumer is certainly going to pay, but I can see our customers coming back to us and saying they can't afford the full 25%. They need to do a deal with us to make sure that business goes on in the future, which is concerning for us because it's cutting into our profits.
In Brussels, retaliation. The European Union's Trade Commissioner confirming the EU will slap its own tariffs on US goods.
It is unfortunate because this is further weakening the transatlantic relations, and it also increases the risk of severe turbulences in the markets globally. Protectionism can never be a solution, and this will hurt jobs here in the European Union, but also in the US. So the US is playing a dangerous game here.
President Trump, after announcing the North Korea summit was back on, was asked about the complaints about tariffs from the UK and the EU, but he wasn't in the mood to de-escalate the trade conflict.
If you take the European Union and you see the kind of tariff they charge, and then we don't, that's called not fair trade. I want fair trade. I like free trade, but I want fair trade. At a minimum, I want fair trade.
Here, the government thinks there's still time to avoid this dispute between allies deepening any further, hoping that a special relationship forged during Europe's darkest hours still means something.
So real concern within the industry from people like Mr. Ellis, who you spoke to there, and yet these calm words from Theresa May. Is she simply keeping the door open to negotiations?
Well, the government's very reluctant to get into an all-out trade war with the US, and you wouldn't expect a free trade enthusiast like Liam Fox to be cheering on the prospect of EU retaliation. Interestingly, just hearing a parting comment from President Trump as he finished taking questions from reporters earlier today, he was asked what he's going to do at Camp David. He's heading there now. He said, "We have a lot of calls set up with foreign leaders. We're negotiating trade deals. So still talk of negotiation. The government thinks there's wriggle room there. Remember, the G7 is coming up next week. President Trump will obviously want to dominate that agenda. And certainly there's political opportunity for Theresa May to go to that meeting, which is in Canada, another country targeted by Trump's tariffs, and come back with some sort of concession. But taking away from this, Trump is reminding all the foreign leaders that are going to be at the G7 meeting that the America First doctrine comes first and any special relationships are secondary.
Angus, thank you. The pictures we're about to show you are one of the clearest examples yet of the growing problem of knife crime in our cities. In the frightening video filmed on a South London street as people go about their day, a cyclist is seen brandishing a so-called zombie knife as he tries to attack a driver. At first trying to smash the windows, then the windscreen. Whether it's gang-related or road rage is still not clear. What is the fear of those who witnessed it.
It's the start of the evening rush hour in one of South London's busiest streets. Traffic at a standstill as a cyclist draws up alongside one of the stationary cars. The driver appears to panic, almost hitting the bike before colliding with an oncoming vehicle. What happens next is deeply disturbing. The cyclist attacks the car with a foot-long knife. Thankfully, the doors are locked from the inside. But when his windows start to shatter and he sees more youths approaching, the driver decides to escape on foot. It all happened in broad daylight in front of dozens of startled people.
It's very scary, very horrendous. I got 2 kids. Right? Sometimes after school hours, they come to help their dad here. Me, when such thing happens, it's quite very, 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 very scary,
What's not clear is whether what happened here was an extreme incident of road rage or a case of 2 young men recognising each other with one of them desperate to get away. Either way, it spectacularly illustrates the curse of knife crime in our cities. The weapon used here is known as a zombie knife. It has a long serrated blade and is increasingly popular on Britain's inner city streets.
What are we here for?
The Ben Kinsella Trust, set up to campaign against knife crime in the name of a teenager stabbed to death in London 10 years ago, says the online purchase of such weapons is a growing problem.
We've seen more evidence of zombie knives which are designed for no other purpose than to harm, maim or kill people, and they are frightening.
A recent ITV News investigation into gangs and knife crime identified the use of weapons like these. The Metropolitan Police are now looking for this man. Paul Davis, News at 10, South London.
And 2 police officers injured this morning in a knife attack, this time in Scotland, have been named tonight. PC's Laura Sayer and Kenny Mackenzie were stabbed whilst answering a call-out in Inverclyde, northwest of Glasgow, this morning. They're said to be in a serious condition in hospital. A 43-year-old man has been arrested. And finally, for a small band of soldiers during the Great War, England's highest peak was the image of home that they clung to in the darkest of days. Like millions of others, the people of the Lake District had answered the call to fight in the fields of France. So when at the end of the war, Scafell Pike was gifted to the nation, a memorial was built on top to those from the area who never returned. Now, a century on, volunteers have returned to the peak to secure their memory for the future.
Battered over a century, the foundations of this cairn are crumbling. It is the highest war memorial in England, but repairing it presents a challenge because it stands on the summit of Scafell Pike.
1, 2, 3.
Every tool for this job has to be carried up, one by one, inch by inch. And commuting to the office here means conquering England's tallest mountain. So, how high is Scafell Pike?
977 metres.
All right. It's been painstaking work, but now the final stones have been laid.
It's taken us about 6 days in all to rebuild the cairn right from the bottom. It's taken about 10 National Trust rangers.
You've been up here for almost a week.
We camped out for four nights last week, and a few of the lads have camped out for 2 nights this week.
Scafell Pike was given to the National Trust at the end of the Great War, the cairn built in memory of those soldiers who once enjoyed the freedom of this land.
There's diary entries and letters from some of the men who lost their lives in the First World War who talk about this mountain and these valleys around here. It was some of the reasons that they were fighting, some of the things that were getting them through the darkest days, and it's an absolute privilege for my team and myself to be involved in recommemorating this mountain.
George Sansom was one of those who wrote about Scafell Pike while fighting in the Great War. His granddaughter still has his old diaries.
Which consists of a magnificent rock face, nearly vertical for about 85 feet.
Sansom was one of 78 members of Britain's Fell and Rock Climbing Club who went away to fight. 20 never returned to the hills they loved.
I think that it's important memorials like that are restored. They're a memory of what people went through. They're a memory of people's courage. I think if he thought that the war memorial was going to be restored and that men were actually camping out, he'd have wanted to be one of them and join them, be up there with them.
Those who have repaired the cairn hope this work honours their predecessors on this mountain. A restored memorial that now stands proud, watching from the heavens over a land for which so many made the ultimate sacrifice. Peter Smith, News at 10, Scafell Pike.